Claire pulled her blue beanie lower over her ears as she walked through the pre-dawn darkness toward the lake. The only sound was the crunch of her boots in the snow and the gentle clinking of her skates slung over her shoulder. This was her time when the world was still sleeping and the ice belonged to her alone. 6 months ago, she wouldn't have dreamed of putting on skates again. Not after years of hiding, of making herself small, of believing what others had said, that bodies like hers weren't meant for grace or beauty. But something had changed that first morning when she'd driven past the lake and seen its surface, smooth as glass in the early light. Now she arrived every morning at 6 a.m., before the joggers and dog walkers, before the kids playing hockey after school. She'd learned to love the ritual of it, lacing up her skates on the frozen bench, taking those first tentative glides across the ice, feeling her body remember what it had always known how to do. "Good morning, Lake," she whispered, stepping onto the ice. The first push was always the hardest and the most thrilling. The cold air kissed her cheeks as she began to move, each stroke becoming more confident than the last. Out here, there were no mirrors, no judgmental eyes, no well-meaning but hurtful comments. There was just the sound of her blades carving patterns into the ice and her breath making clouds in the winter air. Claire had started small, simple strokes around the edge of the lake. But as the weeks passed, her body remembered more. The crossover she'd learned as a child. The backwards glides that had once felt impossible. Even the simple spins that made her feel like she was dancing with the sunrise. Today she tried something new. As she gained speed, she lifted one foot off the ice, extending it behind her in an arabesque. It wasn't perfect, her ankle wobbled, and her arms weren't quite in the right position, but for a moment she felt weightless. Free! A cardinal landed on a nearby branch, scattering snow onto the ice. Claire smiled, thinking of how this little corner of the world had become her sanctuary. The lake didn't care what size she wore or how she looked in workout clothes. It only asked that she show up, that she try, that she allow herself to take up space in the world. As the sun began to peek through the trees, painting the ice in shades of pink and gold, Claire heard the distant sound of children's voices. Her private time was coming to an end, but she didn't feel the usual rush to leave, to hide. She completed one final circuit of the lake, adding a little twirl at the end, something she'd been practicing for weeks. As she glided toward the bench to change her skates, she noticed a young girl watching her, eyes wide with wonder. "You look like a snow fairy," the girl said, clutching her own pair of skates. Claire felt her throat tighten. She remembered being that girl once, before the world had tried to convince her that grace belonged only to certain bodies. That joy had size limitations. "Would you like to learn how to twirl?" Claire heard herself asking, surprising herself. The girl's face lit up like the sunrise. As Claire helped the little girl find her balance on the ice, she realized something important. Maybe her morning skating hadn't just been about finding peace with herself. Maybe it had been preparing her to help others find it too. That afternoon, Claire went home and dug out her old skating instructor certification. It had expired years ago, but as she looked at it, she knew what her next chapter would be. The lake had taught her that beauty comes in all forms, that grace isn't about size or shape, it's about the joy you feel when you move. The next morning she arrived at her usual time, but she brought something new, a small chalkboard sign that read "Inclusive Skating Lessons. Everyone welcome." She placed it near the bench where she'd first laced up her skates 6 months ago, then stepped onto the ice to greet the sunrise with a twirl. After all, some kinds of magic can only be found in the early morning, when the ice is fresh, the world is quiet, and you finally give yourself permission to dance.